Today, let's talk about the Chinese Communist Party's special food supply system. This topic is somewhat sensitive in China. Everyone knows that it exists, but the media usually doesn't dare to investigate it because it touches on the small group of privileged individuals who hold the highest level of authority in China. The CCP's exclusive food system was established around 1950. Even earlier, during the Yan'an period, this special system was also around. For example, leading officials ate in different places, which were divided into so-called big, medium, and small kitchens. Which ranks could eat in the big kitchen, and which could eat in the small kitchen were strictly regulated. But to be honest, the food itself was not particularly exquisite. At that time, food was scarce, and being overly picky was not an option. But after the founding of the PRC, things changed. As everyone knows, soon after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong visited the Soviet Union. At that time, Soviet senior officials told Mao, "You must pay special attention to the food you eat. It's incredibly important. You cannot eat just anything." After Mao's return from the Soviet visit, Soviet experts came to Beijing to help senior CCP officials establish their own special food supply system. They chose a location near Beijing and eventually selected a location at the foot of Xiangshan Mountain. This led to the establishment of Xiangshan Farm. This farm covered an area of about 100 acres. It had fish ponds and cultivated land. Then, many senior officials wondered, is it really necessary to build such a large farm? Jude said, "I don't think so. Because honestly, people like Jude and Mao, who came from peasant backgrounds, were used to using less than half an acre of land to feed a whole family." But the Soviet experts who built this farm said that it had to be built using modernized agricultural methods. Xiangshan Farm produced wheat, vegetables, and also raised pigs and fish, from which the food was given exclusively to the party and state leaders. It was under the management of the Central Guard Bureau, meaning the entrance was guarded by armed police sentries, and the high walls were topped with barbed wire. Outsiders thought it was the location of a heavily guarded, top-secret department. Actually, it was simply the place that produced food for party and state leaders. Later, the scope expanded. Besides the Xiangshan Farm, Zhu Mountain Farm and Yukon Mountain Farm were established, thus forming three major farming operations in Beijing. Back then, central government officials had to do labor every weekend. During Mao's era, they did obligatory labor on Saturdays. Officials from the central government agencies would work on these three farms. Food produced by these three farms was also graded. The highest grade was for Mao, the next grade for other leaders, including the canteens of Zhongnanhai and the canteens of various central authority ministries. The lowest grade was specifically for party and state officials, kindergartners. Once this system was established, it formed a special food supply system separate from the food supply of ordinary people. In other words, the food that ordinary citizens of Beijing and others ate, from production to transportation to supply, was completely separated from the food for these senior officials. From this perspective, anything you could buy in the general market would never be eaten in these kinds of places. I read someone's memoir, where once in the Central Guard Bureau, Mao's security officer bought some vegetables from outside and asked the chef to cook them. But the chef refused. They said that the food they prepared could only come from the special supply system. Any food outside the special supply system was not to be cooked. Later, the system underwent some changes. It was transferred from the Central Guard Bureau to the Beijing Municipal Government. The Beijing Municipal Government then established a department called Ershang Bureau, specifically responsible for producing, distributing, and supplying food to the party and state leaders. Besides the three major farms mentioned earlier, which supplied food to a few party and state leaders, they established the number 34 subsidiary food supply station near Zhongnanhai on Beichang Street. This supply station provided subsidiary food to officials above the deputy minister level, including vegetables and fruits. Phoenix TV once did a program exposing this number 34 supply station. The food in the number 34 supply station had to be purchased. It definitely wasn't supplied for free, but the price still might have been cheaper compared to what ordinary citizens were paying. But more importantly, the food they supplied at the time was hidden from the general public. For example, rare items at the time like chocolate and cakes, including imported cakes, were definitely unavailable for ordinary people, but were available in the number 34 supply station, including vegetables and fruits, which were produced by the three major farms. Though the price was similar to the normal market, they were always available. You have to know, at that time, Beijing citizens' food was supplied in rations. So many things were unavailable, but officials above the deputy minister level could freely make purchases with their qualifications at the number 34 supply station. This formed a relatively comprehensive food supply system. By the years 1959, 1960, and 1961, it was the time of the Great Chinese Famine. This supply system reached its peak then. Why is that? Because during the Great Famine, everyone knows ordinary people could not get enough food, and many starved to death. At that time, the role of the special supply system became even more apparent. Not only were those three main farms involved, but various ministries and commissions in Beijing also vied to establish their own personal food supply bases. In fact, it was not only the ministries in Beijing. I remember that it was also various state-owned enterprises and units at that time. My father's unit had a farm by the Yellow River. What was this farm for? It was for growing wheat and raising some pigs, because food was scarce at that time. They allocated a piece of land over there and set up a farm. After growing wheat, they could distribute some to their employees. Any department with a little bit of power used it to secure food for themselves. This was characteristic of that era. Then in Beijing, the Central Committee of the Communist Party even issued a document about a new government policy that would provide more food to high-level senior officials and intellectuals in Beijing. This document stipulated that officials above a certain level were to be provided with 1 kilogram of meat per day and an additional 6 kilograms of eggs per month. This was on top of what ordinary citizens of Beijing received. But think about what that 1 kilogram of meat per day actually means. The average annual meat consumption of a Beijing citizen at that time was 1.7 kilograms. These officials could consume in one day more than half of what a normal citizen consumed in a year. Don't you think this is a bit nuts? Honestly, 1 kilogram of pork per day is just excessive, even by today's standards. Of course, it was still for the whole family, not just the one person. But ordinary citizens practically couldn't get any. All year round, they essentially couldn't eat meat at all. You see, once this privileged system was established, its primary function at the beginning was to supply food for these particular individuals. To ensure the supply of these food items in times of scarcity, nobody else could get them, but they could. This was its most important function, especially during the Great Famine period. The second function was to meet some particular needs of the party and state leaders, especially Mao Zedong. Since Mao was born a peasant, he was not very demanding about his living and traveling conditions, but he was very particular about his food. Although he was particular about his food, from a modern food science and nutrition standpoint, it was still not healthy. For example, Mao liked to eat dishes fried in lard, and he liked braised pork, as everyone knows. But Mao's dietary standards were high, and it was not easy to satisfy them according to his preferences. So in the entire special supply system, there's a whole section dedicated to serving just Chairman Mao. For instance, one of the 3 big farms was exclusively for Chairman Mao's use. One summer, Mao said it just turned summer, so he wanted to eat oranges, but there still weren't any oranges yet. There were no oranges because of bad weather. Even if you went yelling Mao quotes at the orange trees, they still wouldn't grow any faster. At the end of the day, they still couldn't get those oranges. Mao was furious and said these people were useless. They can't even get me some oranges when asked. Eventually, the farm started working on innovative solutions. They prepared a special area for Mao to grow off-season vegetables and fruits. This included bitter melon, small rapeseed, and his favorite water bamboo. He loved eating water bamboo. For fruits, they grew seedless mini watermelons, and oranges for him. You gotta understand, back then people couldn't even get regular watermelons, and here he was, enjoying seedless ones. That was a supply exclusively for Chairman Mao. Other leaders couldn't even dream of it. He was the top priority. Honestly speaking, after the founding of the country, Mao enjoyed privileges even beyond those of ancient emperors. From what I've read, those feudal emperors had nothing on Mao, especially when it comes to food. Just take the Fu, for example. Right after the founding of the PRC Hunan province, selected top chefs who specialized in Hunan cuisine and sent over a dozen highly skilled chefs to Beijing. Mao always had personal chefs, even back in the Yanyan period. During his time in Jibaipo and living in the Shuangqing Villa in Beijing, he always had his own personal chefs. But honestly, they weren't that skilled. So as soon as Hunan was liberated, they started looking for top chefs throughout the province. Dozens were sent to Beijing for Mao to choose from. Finally, 2 stayed on at Mao's residence. By 1955 or 1956, Mao already had 5 or 6 chefs at home. Later, a system was established where chefs from Beijing restaurants took turns cooking for Mao. they'd rotate every 3 years. Of course, it all depended on Mao's preferences. If he liked a chef, they'd stay a bit longer. If not, they might be out in just a few days. That was the system in his kitchen. Mao had peculiar daily habits, as I've mentioned before. He lived pretty much the exact opposite of most normal people. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and start sleeping in the afternoon. He didn't sleep in the latter half of the night. After he wakes up, he has to eat one meal and then another one before going to bed. He eats twice a day, so the kitchen staff had to live according to his routine. Once Mao wakes up, his meal is prepared and served within 20 minutes. So, when Mao sleeps, these kitchen staff have to take sleeping pills and sleep along with him. The moment Mao wakes up, they get up to cook for him without delay. That's basically how the system worked. You might think Mao ate fairly ordinary food ingredients, but getting those ingredients wasn't easy. For instance, Mao liked freshwater fish, not seafood. He preferred wuchang fish. He wrote a poem which said, "I just drank changsha water and I'm now eating wuchang fish." So where did Mao's wuchang fish come from? Back then, Beijing didn't have any. His fish came from a place in Hunan called Dongfanghong Fishery. This Dongfanghong Fishery would pick out fish for him every week. After selecting, they would air freight the fish to Beijing. Just imagine, in that era, how expensive airplanes were as a method of transportation. Every week, wuchang fish were flown from Hunan to Beijing for Mao's personal consumption. There were also some small fish and shrimps from the Zhongnanhai Lake that Mao liked to eat. They would be caught and fried or sautéed for him, and only he was allowed to eat them. No other leaders like Zhu De or Zhou Enlai dared to eat them. So, Mao enjoyed a diet like that of an emperor. Once, he mentioned his feet were itchy. He had athlete's foot. He said, "You normally give me white rice. I want to have some brown rice this time, okay?" When he said this, there were only 2 to 3 hours left before mealtime. The Central Security Bureau immediately called Jiangshan Farm, saying Mao wanted to have brown rice with dinner. Back then, there was no brown rice, and no rice hullers to make it. Brown rice had to be ground on a brick, so people at Jiangshan Farm immediately took out grains and started grinding them. They quickly ground half a kilogram of rice, and rushed it to Zhongnanhai at top speed. Then, in Mao's kitchen, they made a bowl of brown rice for him. He got to eat it that very night and was very pleased. So, you see, although Mao's food might have seemed ordinary, he enjoyed treatment fit for an emperor. Speaking of Mao's smoking habits, Mao initially smoked Panda brand cigarettes. They were produced by the Shanghai cigarette factory. Later, in the 1960s, He Long told him, "Cigars are better than cigarettes, Mao. You should try them." Mao took one puff and thought it was pretty good. He then asked where the cigars were made. He Long told him they were produced by the Shifang cigarette factory in Sichuan. On Mao's orders, the Shifang cigarette factory tested 35 different formulas and sent them to Beijing for him and He Long to choose from. Mao chose the more mild number 2 formula, while He Long chose the stronger number 13 formula. Afterwards, the Shifang cigarette factory established the 132 Project Group. They grew the best tobacco on a specific plot of land exclusively for these 2 individuals. Several skilled experts were organized and allocated a small courtyard to exclusively roll cigarettes for delivery to Beijing. Mao then started smoking cigarettes from the Shifang cigarette factory. It's said that once, while smoking during a meeting, hot ash from his cigarette fell onto the table and burnt a hole in the tablecloth. Within half an hour, a call was made to the Shifang cigarette factory, complaining about the quality of their cigarettes, claiming that burning ashes were falling from the cigarettes. The great leader almost set the table on fire while smoking. The Shifang cigarette factory was terrified. They quickly checked who produced each box of cigarettes and recorded all the formulas. After checking, they tried to find out what was wrong with the formula, which caused the incident. After some investigation, they found out there might be an issue with the current formula and improved it. Afterward, the problem never occurred again. Later, in the late 1960s, to ensure Mao's smoking safety, the technical staff of the Shifang cigarette factory were all transferred to Beijing. They set up production in a small courtyard neighboring Zhongnanhai. This courtyard was guarded by sentries and topped with barbed wire. These people often weren't even allowed to stay in touch with their families, and their families didn't even know what kind of work they were doing. It was a confidential unit. In reality, they were just there to produce cigarettes solely for Mao. Because later, He Long was imprisoned, I guess he couldn't smoke the number 13 formula after that happened. Only Mao could. After Mao's death, these people were transferred to the Beijing cigarette factory. The Beijing cigarette factory later launched the Zhongnanhai brand based on the specially supplied cigarettes they used to produce. This was the method they used. Many anti-smoking advocates have said numerous times that naming a cigarette brand Zhongnanhai is quite shameful. Why? Because Zhongnanhai is where the party and national leaders reside. You're creating a cigarette brand with that name on it. It completely goes the opposite direction of anti-smoking. After Deng Xiaoping came to power, Deng Xiaoping liked smoking Panda brand cigarettes. So, the Shanghai cigarette factory continued to produce cigarettes for Deng Xiaoping. These cigarettes were produced every 2 months. Once prepared, they were sent to Beijing. During the production of these special supplied cigarettes, all the furnaces had to be totally shut down. Afterward, they underwent a thorough cleaning. Not a trace of tobacco residue could remain in the furnace. Then, a specially supplied batch of tobacco leaves was brought in. These were then used in the furnaces for production. After producing a small batch, it was sent to Beijing. This process occurred every 2 months. It's said that some factory workers thought these cigarettes were exceptionally good. One person even stole some and was caught. They received a 2-year prison sentence. Later, the Shanghai cigarette factory also came out with Panda brand cigarettes for the public. But these were completely different from the specially supplied ones. The highest price for these cigarettes in the market was 5,000 yuan per carton. That's 500 yuan a pack. This special supply system seems ordinary in terms of ingredients, but actually producing them involves huge costs. There's a massive system ensuring their quality. So this is a vast hierarchy, meant to satisfy the special needs of party and state leaders, whether it's Mao or Deng Xiaoping. The third aspect is its use for ensuring food safety. Everyone knows that after the founding of the PRC, pesticides and fertilizers were introduced. Farmers used to grow crops with DDT and lindane. I remember back in my day, it was directly applied to crops. But in the farms of party and state leaders, no chemical fertilizers or pesticides were permitted in the growing of agricultural products. So, what was used for fertilizer? Soybean meal. It's what's left after extracting the oil from soybeans. This substance is processed into other foods too, but in Beijing's 3 major farms, it's used as fertilizer. Think about it. How could the crops not be good? The crops are fertilized with something that people eat. So they grew exceptionally well and didn't use any pesticides. After the economic reforms, these 3 bases of operation were certified by the Ministry of Agriculture as organic. They're completely different from what the general public eats. Think about the quality of food consumed by the public. Before the Cultural Revolution, it was not even worth talking about. During those times, people couldn't even get enough to eat. After the Cultural Revolution, there were Jinhua hams made with DDT, and mooncakes made with years-old fillings. This system is completely disconnected from the special supply system for leaders. Why is it said that it's hard to solve food safety issues in China? A major reason is that the food leaders eat is different from that of ordinary people. Consider how common people can end up drinking fake alcohol and dying, while they get to drink a special supply of Mao Tai liquor. Your moon cakes might be made with decade-old fillings, but they eat the best of the best, all specially supplied. Everyone knows that there are special supply bases for Zhongnanhai all over China. Take tea, for instance. When I visited Jiangxi Wuiwan years ago, I was told there was a spot in the mountains guarded by armed police. The tea produced there is exclusively for Zhongnanhai. And if you check some local government websites like in Sichuan, they all say their local tea is also exclusively for Zhongnanhai. Later, this included many other ingredients. For example, Luhua peanut oil even had a label stating, "For the Great Hall of the People." They also get special batches of oil made for them. This whole special supply system is completely isolated from the food available to ordinary people. This leads to a problem. The common people face food safety issues, which party and national leaders don't experience at all. They're not in harm's way. So why is China's food safety hard to resolve? It's because food safety issues don't threaten their leaders' health. Think about it. When Mao Zedong once had cigarette ash fall on his desk, a call was made immediately to the Shifang cigarette factory. If the same effort were used to establish a food traceability system, couldn't China's food safety system be well managed? Of course it could. But we use such enormous amounts of national resources just to satisfy one person's needs. Meanwhile, the food safety of our 1.4 billion people receives far too little attention and resources. This is the systemic reason behind China's food safety issues. Consider for a moment why Beijing's smog problem was solved. Years ago, while conducting interviews regarding Beijing's smog issue, I was told by someone from the Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau that it couldn't be solved in 50 years. But unexpectedly, in 5 years, it was resolved. Why? Because they couldn't make a special air supply. You can't put a cover over Zhongnanhai and create a separate biosphere for these people to breathe inside. And these leaders can't wear gas masks every day. So they, like the common people, breathe the same filthy air. They're afraid, they're worried. Eating their organic food alone isn't enough. Breathing polluted air could still lead to lung cancer. So Beijing made a huge effort to solve the smog issue, and it worked. All steel factories in the surrounding area were either moved or shut down. Why did this happen? In winter, many factories were forced to cease operations. We all know the areas around Beijing and Hebei are outdated. Many farmers still use coal for heating. Even rural schools use coal stoves for warmth. But they were ordered to stop no matter what. So those kids ended up with frostbitten hands. But it didn't matter, because if those kids didn't suffer, the leaders in Zhongnanhai would have to breathe polluted air. So back then I was very opposed to Beijing using such administrative methods to tackle the smog issue, because it came at the cost of harming people's livelihoods. But why did they eventually go down this road? It's because privileged people were worried about their health, and there was no feasible way to provide special air for them. China's special food supply is not only reflective of a food-related issue, it's a problem regarding the system itself. It's about whether power is sufficiently constrained or not. Why is there a special supply system? Because the common people's opinions can't impact this system. Logically, in a democratically elected system, in a truly people-oriented society, in a system centered around the people, they wouldn't allow the policy to decide on a class to enjoy a completely different food production and distribution system than most people. But in China's current system, there is no way for people's opinions to reach there. So this small circle enjoys the safest, highest standard foods, while the common people can only eat food that is not necessarily safe for consumption. So this special supply system is like a tumor. If it can't be dealt with, the issue of food safety for ordinary Chinese people may never be completely solved. Because unless it affects those in charge, it doesn't matter what the fate of the people is or how good the quality of the air they breathe is. So when can this problem be solved? I think there's only one possibility. That is, the restrictions affecting citizens and repressed public opinions must be expressed to those who possess the highest levels of authority. As for when this can be achieved, I'm not sure. Our show today is just to tell everyone that outside the generally unsafe food system for the Chinese people, there is a small group of people who constantly claim to serve the people, shouting "Long live the people," yet they enjoy a vastly better food system than the people.